So a month into the war with Iran, we've got oil over $100 a barrel. U.S. troops are taking fire in Saudi Arabia. We're putting more on the ground. Secretary Rubio says nobody in Washington sure is even in charge in Tehran. And we've got a Middle East policy expert to tell us what's really happening, what the play is here. Lora Karch is a Fox News contributor, among other things, joining the show this morning. Laura, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Thank you so
much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So Marco Rubio told our allies, the G7, there's genuine uncertainty about who's actually making decisions in Tehran right now. As someone who studies this, what's that tell you about the state of their government?
At this point, I do believe that there might be a scramble right now, given the old Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who's dead. His successor, his son is, I'm so sorry. His name, Mojtaba Khamenei. He's actually reportedly recovering from an airstrike right now in a hospital. But it's been a while now that he's been out of the media, and it's raising doubts on whether or not he's dead or alive. The situation on the ground as well is not that great. The power is still down in the capital. There's more strikes coming in from Israel, and Iran is responding, of course. The internal instability will persist, but there's nothing televised as of late. There's reports saying more than 40% of Iran's population is also now living below the poverty line. So there's a whole risk of new protests as well amidst everything that's been going on.
That's the concern, right? Is there's protests because of their standard of living, because of the pain and agony. And right now it's directed towards the regime. But again, if we're not careful, we've seen this before, Laura, how long before it flips and it's our fault as opposed to the oppressing government that they have?
Right, exactly. And that's what the Trump administration is trying to do, because they're not really trying to send in the 3,000 troops that have been promised, right? They're trying to do this as swiftly as possible. And, as the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, also just mentioned that this war is going to take another 2 to 4 weeks. So without a real timeline, I think everyone's just waiting to see whether or not we invade or whether or not we do take over the nearby island, Harg Island, which also holds 90% of Iran's oil exports.
Wow. So Iranian officials, it seems like they want to negotiate. One of the things that came out last week was that Trump is negotiating with himself, saying they're not talking to us, but clearly Pakistan is involved in this and saying the two guys are maybe close to meeting at some point or coming up with a plan at least. And talks, right. Beginning talks are awesome. So kind of would think that the U.S. is not doing this we're not doing this on our own. But Iranian officials who wanted to negotiation are reportedly staying off their phones to avoid being assassinated. How do you conduct diplomacy in that kind of environment?
Well, that's the confusing part. As you said, we're 1 month in and there have been nonstop strikes back and forth. But all the while, Trump is saying that Iran is actually desperate to make a deal. But their recent refusal of a U.S. 15-point plan is showing us otherwise. Now, what happened in Pakistan? Pakistan also hosted the foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt for in-depth regional security talks. I believe they had their second meeting this past weekend, and they're meeting again today. So I do believe that what we're looking at is an expanding war. Much to the chagrin of the Trump administration, who wants to be out by the next month or so.
How much longer does this drag on? Rubio said 2 to 4 weeks, so we'll be 2 months into this thing. I just presume, based on what you told me, Laura, it's going to be longer than that.
I personally presume it might take up until, the first month of summer, let's say June, July. But again, I do hope Rubio is right, and it'll only take another 4 weeks.
All right. So the conclusion then is what? I mean, how does the regime save face? They're not going to simply turn their guns over and say, okay, you put a democratic system in here, which of course we've tried many times. It doesn't work. What does an agreement look like?
An agreement, I would say, it starts with the citizens of Iran. As you said, they might reach their own breaking point. And I think at this point, the main mission for the U.S. is actually the oil and Harg Island and reopening the Strait of Hormuz, because that's really put a chokehold on imports and exports around the world. As far as regime change, I don't believe that it's in the U.S.'s interest to go in and invade just for that. I think it is up to the citizens to choose their next leader, whether or not it's an Ayatollah. yet to be determined.
We have 50,000 troops now on the ground in the region there, specifically. Now, if you hear that headline, oh my God, we sent 50,000 troops. No, we have 40,000 there already on the bases that we have. It's an additional 10,000. There may be more. That is not playing well at home, especially with Donald Trump's base. And the question would be, how many more soldiers, sailors, and airmen do you need in that region? And can this thing be done without us having to go in and get the nukes out, which essentially means a ground invasion?
Right, exactly. And Trump also added that we have about 3,500 targets left. So he's assuming that it's going to be done pretty quickly. But then at the same time, our 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit just arrived, excuse me, in the Middle East. And this past weekend, they also just used dozens of Tomahawk missiles. So it's looking like diplomacy along with some bombings. And I'm honestly not sure how long this is going to take. Yeah.
Rubio said Lora Karch is 2 to 4 weeks, so another month. But that may be accelerated because Trump said he has an April 6th deadline, so that'd be next week for Iran to make a deal or face strikes on power plants. Is that a credible ultimatum? Is it Trump saber rattling? Is he just simply spewing stuff with no backup, or is it a negotiation tactic, or all of that?
It's actually very credible because they are starting to hit some of their energy infrastructure. But Iran is responding back because it also is hitting the Gulf countries' water desalination plants. So the situation can escalate pretty quick. Israel's also hitting South Lebanon. So there's just a lot more expansion to this right now. And it's including, a lot more infrastructure. It's including universities as well, Iranian universities. Mm-hmm. Iranian is also responding and saying, well, we're going to hit American universities also if you don't stop. So this can be a tit for tat, and it can go up all the way to the summer, all the way up to the end of the year. But Iran, the main thing is that it's continuing to respond in attacking its Gulf countries, which is not in America's interest as well, because half of them are our allies. When it comes to targeting the water and energy infrastructure, just this past weekend, it was hitting Kuwait with their water and energy infrastructure, Saudi Arabia, the UAE. Now Jordan is being pulled into the meeting. So the strikes are marking very major escalations. So I think at this point, it's in Trump's interest to de-escalate.
Yeah. You look at the map and you've got all these countries around there getting sucked in. Yemen, adjacent to Saudi Arabia, is now getting pulled in, well, to some degree anyway, because the Houthis have entered the chat. How significant is that escalation?
Exactly. So the Yemeni Houthis actually attacked Israel this past weekend. So they're officially joining the war. They used ballistic missiles, and, this was after repeated warnings that they would enter the war if the energy and infrastructure attacks don't stop. And so, if we're thinking about expansion, we also have to think about the Shiites in Iraq, who are also influenced by Iran. We have Hezbollah as well in Lebanon. And I think recently, actually, the new Ayatollah sent an appeal to the Iraq-based Ayatollah, which, signals some very bad news for the U.S. and Israel if things don't go their way by April 6th.
Then here stateside, we have nearly 300 American troops injured, 225 with traumatic brain injuries, TBIs. We haven't fully absorbed those casualty numbers yet. Does that change the calculus for this administration? And is that a slow ticking time bomb for us, or at least from a political standpoint here in America?
I think at this point, Trump was advertising regime change, but I think things are a little more complicated, especially now that soldiers are being harmed. So again, the main mission has to be reopening the Strait of Hormuz and, getting out of there as quickly as possible.
Marco Rubio said that he wants the allied nations, to police the Strait of Hormuz after the war ends. Is that realistic as far as post-war architecture goes? And who enforces that?
Those are some great questions. And I believe at this point, it's not very realistic given the way that Iran is acting and responding with attacks. A couple of boats, actually, international boats, have been bombed in the Strait since February 28th. And, I like the way that Trump is being positive and saying we're going to get a deal soon, but it's not looking like that in reality. And especially with their responses of bombing, even ships from the Netherlands, from Greece, from Japan, very random. And the only real ships that can pass at this moment are commercial ships. And that's not without toll. So I'm not sure if it's very realistic to go in to an island that is next to the strait and say, we control it without causing something bigger.
Yeah, exactly. And, you look at that choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, outside the Persian Gulf, and you see how easy it is. School kid could tell you how easy it is for Iran to attack anything going through there. And now they have been for a while talking about maybe tolls. That's another layer to this thing. Is it about money from Iran? I can't think that I'm like, okay, so you want to open up a toll lane here that they have to pay a price to Iran? I'm not quite sure how that boils up to being something that's negotiable even. It's like, it's okay. If you want to do that, you can. I'm not sure how that works, but that certainly is not one of the big things about this war, is it?
No, I don't think it's more about the money than it is about the control in the region. As I said, they have administered an unofficial toll for the ships that were stuck there and passing through. But I think it's more or so to control the actions of the United States in the region, which is why Trump is probably fighting back and resisting. But Iran knows that it has this chokehold on the oil market right now. And I think that's its only piece of leverage that it has in this war, especially with its dead original Ayatollah and the son nowhere to be found.
Lora Karch, Israel is bombing the hell out of Lebanon as we speak in response to Hezbollah and their rocket attacks. And they're no stranger to these kind of things. But how do you manage two simultaneous fronts without destabilizing the other? I mean, go back to other war. World War II would be a great example. You can't fight a war on two fronts.
I agree. I have to agree with that. It's unfortunate. And I do believe, hitting Hezbollah targets is always good, but it is expanding into a wider war at this point. And I don't think that we as, even a world can deal with so much conflict at once. It has expanded to hitting universities, those institutions. Now we have a bunch of American universities in that region as well that are being threatened. So I think at this point, de-escalation would be our best bet. Hezbollah or not.
Yeah, it seems close, too, because you have so many allies, so many Arab countries that have taken our side anyway. Now, granted, there's countries like Yemen and others that have sided with Iran, but by and large, most of those countries or regions getting hit. You talk about the UAE and others that are suffering the effects of this thing. It feels like we have a coalition. It just, at this point, doesn't feel like the needle's moving on it. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes, very accurate. And that includes Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain. It's a bunch of the Gulf Cooperation Council countries that have, they're being targeted in their energy infrastructure, their military sites. We have, American servicemen out there that are being threatened at this point.
And not only that, Iran is running an information war against us. I often talk about the digital war going on. That's, granted, it's not going to kill people. Well, it might. I mean, there's that plant in Nebraska that got shut down. The Iranians claim that wound up killing a man and his two children who happened to be at this biomass plant. So we do have a casualty in that. But that is the issue most people don't consider and talk about is the digital attacks, and that would be the campaign that Iran is running relative to an information war. How effective is that in this whole thing, do you think?
At this point, I do believe that it might have potential. But I'm not hearing about any more hacks or things like that into the U.S. infrastructure. More than I heard about the possibility of sleeper cells. As you know, the FBI did warn about that in California and D.C. and Los Angeles and other major cities.
Yeah.
So I think that would be something to look at. And of course, be on guard for any hacking or digital or energy infrastructure of our own that can be targeted by
Yeah, I think the scary part, and we've talked about this for a while, is like a digital 9/11, to coin a phrase. It feels like from the experts I talked to, that day is coming. We just saw what happened with Stryker Medical, and that story, of course, is now in the rearview mirror because you go, well, it doesn't really affect me, most people. But something of that scale where it would get our attention would absolutely bring us to our knees, and it's probably a lot easier to do than with bombs and missiles.
Right, exactly. And that is what Iran has essentially been tweeting about on X. They're saying, they have some surprise weapon that they were about to unleash, but they have been saying that for a couple weeks now. So I'm not sure that it's very credible. All
right. So bottom line here, Lora Karch, is we're talking at least a month, maybe first part of summer here, maybe into June before this thing ends. But again, your guess is as good as anybody's.
Right, exactly. I mean, I'm hoping Rubio is right and we don't go past the 4 week mark.
Well, again, you wonder how much economic strain, too, because it's bringing the markets down. Gas is very expensive. Of course, it's an affordability thing, and this may be short-term and short-lived for sure, but you think you'd have to wrap this up. Midterms come into play as well, and I don't think anyone wants to stomach any boots on the ground. So hopefully, fingers crossed, Rubio's right, or at the very least, we'll get this thing done sometime in May. Lora Karch is a Fox News contributor and independent Middle East researcher. Lora, thanks for the insight. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Be well.